let's talk about how to program drums like this. Welcome to my channel, Yasin here, and today we're gonna talk about how to program drums. I want this video to be a no bullshit guide. I'm gonna give you my formula because that is asked in the Reddit and YouTube when I share my demos and my last single, Fracture. After the formula, we're gonna talk about how to get better and better at this. It's all about shifting your mindset to a drummer, and I'm going to give you quick tips about how to do that as well. First of all, I am assuming that you have the riff idea and you did not track it or track to a metronome. And all we need to do is actually coming up with the easiest patterns ever. You're going to throw a couple of cymbals here and there, maybe only one. Wherever you want to have your pick attacks, I'm making djent. It's most of the time zeros and chugs, and in my case I put kicks for every single pick attack. This means that I'm gonna have a lot of kicks at first, and you're gonna put 2 or 4, maybe both, backbeat on the snare so you can actually follow the patterns much easier. After this one, turn off your metronome and start tracking, because we have kicks as a guide. So when you follow the kicks, you will track as tight as possible, and you're going to rely on the drums now. At this point, we are in the drum leading realm instead of the metronome, because if you track your guitars to a metronome and you drum programming after that, you won't have as tight takes as possible. If you finish tracking, our next step is actually removing the kicks. At this point, you are slowly creating the groove, and you will use and rely on your ears most of the time. If you just follow every single pick attack, it's not gonna breathe. And for that reason, it's actually really important to come up with less and less kicks. When there's a kick, it's gonna give the energy. It's gonna give the groove, it's gonna give the focus. For that reason, following the whole riff with kicks is not the best solution. The next step is snare. The important part here is to putting snare exactly where you want, exactly where you dream. So if snare hit is not the place where you were expecting, it might be a good thing depending on your genre, but in my case I move the snare. When it's in 2 and 4, it's enough, but sometimes I have different patterns, different riffs that require to change my snare timing. After the snare, you need to rework on your cymbals depending on the energy of the song, where you are, maybe verse, maybe chorus. You are going to change the cymbals. Maybe something more quiet, panned out with energy. Maybe it's a breakdown and you immediately go to China. You will have some sort of opinions over it even before actually starting, when you have the idea as a riff. And it's usually coming from the music you want to listen to. In my case, for example, China is always favored when it comes to breakdowns. I always put it as less as possible to have big gaps. Depending on what you're listening, you will have different idea and understanding here, and we're going to apply that in our programming. After the cymbal rework, it's always important to go back to snare and add the ghost notes. At this point, you know if you're gonna hit 2 cymbals or just 1. So you know if something is humanly impossible, you're not gonna put the ghost notes there. I always think 16th when it comes to ghost notes, depending on how busy is the riff and how loud I want my ghost snares. I think about my instincts first. So if I expect a little bit of movement there, a little bit of accenting, I definitely put there ghost notes. And I listen in isolation and also in context, and depending on how's the feeling, I either remove or just move the ghost snares at that point. At this point, I'm expecting that you come up with something that is matching fully, but at the same time, it's not the most interesting thing ever. What we need to do is listen everything without the drums. We need to understand if the sound in our heads are matching completely to the thing we wrote. And high likely it's not there yet because you didn't add the fills. But before adding the fills, I really suggest you to think about if you're using the correct drum library. You need to think about the sound, you need to think about the size of the kit, because it's going to affect how you are programming the whole fills. So you can create fills with cymbal works, with toms. That's how I go for it usually. If you change your kit after that, it's gonna affect your fills. Probably you're not gonna like that. For that reason, please think about if you're using the correct kit, and we're gonna talk about the fills after that. To come up with fills, you need to think about your inspirations. Which bands you are listening is inspiring that particular riff or the demo or the whole song. It's gonna give you kind of an idea what kind of fill you need to do. Don't come up with an extremely busy fill when it comes to a very, very simple riff. I personally don't like that at all, and I try to match my hits and my tom changes to the riffs. Like it's supposed to match as good as possible. If I have, for example, 3 notes like da-na-na, I change to 3 different toms in that pick attacks, and it gives me some sort of tightness. I always look for what I actually played with the guitar, and I try to match that as good as possible. And sometimes it's just very simple cymbal hits. Sometimes it's just a lot of drum work in the toms. Sometimes I'm including snare. Sometimes I'm using multiple toms and create a little bit more low end, and hits. It's just coming from a little bit more deep and gives you some sort of heaviness. It's all coming from my inspirations. When I think about fills, most of the time I already have instinctively some idea, like what would my inspiration would do. Now it's time for the second realization, which is the cymbal work. You need to listen here section by section and come up with anything that you put extra. I'm saying extra because usually when you're listening drum solos, drum works, live takes, you always have this extra bit of cymbal work that is coming and they change the parts a little bit to come up with really juicy grooves, and that's our goal now. We are adding a little bit more spice, and usually for me it's just opening the whole MIDI, listen to it a couple more times. If I can add a couple of right hits, that's always good. Most importantly, you can think about changing the cymbal work, so maybe you can move it 8th or 16th, and depending on your riff you can change the pattern a little bit, and if riff goes slower, less hits, you can try to match that or come up with a little bit more interesting cymbal work, maybe hi-hat work if you don't do that too much. Getting closer to the fills and the transition of the riff to the next, maybe transition of the next section of the song. It may inspire you to change your cymbal work to hi-hats. Maybe it's in the hi-hats, you can add a couple more china and actually change the focus of the listener. Like, look, I'm changing the section, be aware of it, I'm coming up with more interesting stuff, be ready. That kind of message is always good, and I think section by section listening is gonna help you with that, because you will clearly know where you're ending it. So you will think like, something is missing here, it's just too simple maybe, or it's too complicated, or I'm not making the listener ready for changing to another section. These parts are always the spices that you need. So if you want to go to the next level, you should definitely check this part. And the final part is humanization. This part is really important because it's gonna give you the realism that you want. You can come up with very good parts, but when everything is on the grid, everything is 127, it's not gonna give you the feeling you want, because what we need is the feeling of a drummer. For that reason, if your parts have more dynamics, if it needs to be quiet, definitely drop the velocity down. Definitely don't use the highest velocity if you're not using something like Ultimate Heavy Drums, which is designed for that. And when it comes to timing, everything shouldn't on the grid. It's quite normal that a drummer will rush or drag, even though it's not going to be on the grid, it's going to be quite close. I'm using Logic's Humanization tool. I also suggest, if you have the support for it, in the box velocity and timing humanization tools. For me, in the last single, I used Modern and Massive 2's the humanization tool, which was quite easy to use, and you can set the humanization for every single kit piece individually. You don't have to do it, but I did it because I thought that kick and snare should be a little bit closer to the grid and cymbals should be a little bit smoother. For that reason, I changed their velocities individually. I also do that sometimes with the Logic's tool, but not always. Now we're gonna talk about how to think like a drummer. We need to set the mood so well that our drum programming will match the context and it will be also quite realistic. If you don't play drums but want to think like a drummer, what you need to do is active analysis, and it will take time. You're gonna get better and better at this, and you need to build a vocabulary also in here to think like a drummer. For that, I need you to name 5 drummers. In my case, it's Matt Halpern, 2 Jay Postones, Mike Portnoy, Mike Mallion, and I need you to find playthrough videos on YouTube so that you can watch and listen and try to understand how that works. Active listening and active watching here is great, And as a guitar player, you may think that, okay, I'm listening already, I know most of the parts, I can imagine that, I can hear those here as well. When you're watching a playthrough, it's gonna give you some sort of connection, a visual guide regarding what is possible and what is not possible. Most of the time, it's not possible to go from rightmost area in terms of panning, for example, there's a crash here, to the leftmost area, because it requires a physical move. There are so many players like Mike Mangini, for example, making this possible, and depending how you're writing the drum parts, it can be completely possible. But depending on how fast it is, how fast a drummer should be doing that movement, you will understand the physical capabilities of a person, especially a professional drummer, so you can do a much better programming here. And while listening to a song, as a guitar player at least, I focus on guitars a little bit too much, and I imagine most of the times the riffs. When you have that visual drumming in front of you, you can easily change and shift your focus into the drum parts, and probably, because it happened to me, you're gonna hear much more details when you active listen and active watch this way. And it's really important to watch these because you can come up with better feels. It is a little bit harder to come up with feels, and you need to be a little bit more original and matching to the riff. So having this in mind, active listening and watching and seeing those feels performed is gonna give you a better idea about how can you put that into your context. Because looking at the MIDI part, the MIDI section, is not going to give you the inspiration. The most important part is actually being able to visualize it. The second alternative is here to have MIDI packs. You can definitely use them for creative purposes, no problem with that, but also try to understand how those drum programming, or maybe if they actually played it, is done. It's going to give you some sort of understanding how you can come up with your own stuff as well. And for that reason, I definitely think that all these groove packs out there are really good resource to work on. You can use those as a educational material as well. Finally, you need to air drum. If you cannot air drum it, it means that you cannot program it. The most important part here is to find people that genuinely makes you want to play drums. In my case, especially for the last years, it was always Matt Halpern, but at the same time, 2 from Sleep Token really makes me want to play drums, because I'm listening to them since 2018-19, and he was a great inspiration to me when it comes to drum programming as well. I always find myself try to replicate what he plays, and most of them have these very interesting drum parts that are matching vocals also really good. And for that reason, I believe I found the people I'm really interested in listening, and if I were a drummer, I would definitely cover these bands. But of course, the people I'm mentioning are really amazing players, and I wouldn't be able to, come up with even similar stuff. For that reason, I split the legwork and my handwork, and I try to think them differently. That's really important for me because it makes me basically able to play. Even though it's air drumming, I can get closer that type of air drumming. And after some point with air drumming and active listening, you will realize that you're coming up with the parts that you couldn't probably dream months or maybe years ago. And that's about it. We talked about drum programming. I gave you my own formula, which is proven many times with demos and my signals. And I talk about how to change your mindset to a drummer so you can come up with more interesting and inspirational patterns. I'm Yasin. I'm making djenty prog metal and a little bit of lo-fi. It's kind of my duality in music. I'm a guitar player who covers Periphery, Dream Theater, Pliny, Epica, Alter Bridge, and so on. Also doing a couple of remakes, mix rundowns, gear and plugin reviews. So if you're interested in one or some of those, you're gonna find a lot of cool videos in the channel. Thank you so much for checking this video, and I hope to see you on the next one.